So just want to say welcome. For those of you that don't know who I am, I'm Alison Potts from England Athletics. I'm the events manager at England. I'd like to welcome you all to these next couple of workshops we've got. The reason that we've put these together is not only because of Rob's generosity of his time, but we're trying to bridge the gap for clubs, counties and the competition providers, as we're all aware that competition announcers are few and far between. Rob's kindly agreed to give his time and his experience to share his knowledge and stories. As clean as possible, please, Rob.
Yes, okay. I'll try not to swear. And
inspire some of you to become competition announcers. So it's with great pleasure that I hand over to Rob Walker, obviously TV commentator, sports commentator, stadium announcer, and all-round great guy. So, Rob, take it away, please.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much, Alison. Good evening, everybody. Some of this is a bit dry. And look, there are more experienced men and women out there than me, but Alison and I have been working together for the last few years, and I've recognised from working with her and the rest of the team at England Athletics that there is a bit of a shortage of expertise and knowledge, and that sometimes, you know, the concept of standing up in front of your peers, even though you all will have an excellent level of athletics knowledge, it can be a bit strange because in a funny kind of way, I mean, look, I'm nothing special, but I do quite a lot of television athletics commentary and other things. I actually think in a weird kind of way, talking to your peers, the people that you would be standing shoulder to shoulder with at a meet, is probably the hardest audience because A, you can see them and hear them, and B, you know that most of them know at least as much as you do about athletics, probably more. So in a weird kind of way, I think that's harder than broadcasting on TV, which I'm more used to because, yes, of course, you've still got to get it right, and there are other associated pressures with being live on TV, but you want to impress and sit nicely on the ear of your contemporaries. So that can be a bit nerve-wracking. But Alison, if you fire it on to the first slide, please. I've never done a PowerPoint before. It's quite, here we go, right. So it's quite a new experience for me. So look, as I said, I'm going to try and not make this too dry and give you loads of time for questions at the end. I think what I'm going to try and aim for you to get out of this is, in terms of the clarity, it's about, I was writing notes today. This is going to be about, it's about being confident, because otherwise you wouldn't be putting yourselves in the position where at any level of meet, you're in that position of being the voice, trying to harness it all together. Obviously, it's about your knowledge, but I also want you to finish today by understanding that as much as it's about knowledge and having a strong voice, it's also about being down to earth and almost being easy to work with, and sometimes having a little bit of a thick skin, because you're not always going to get it right. And whilst people will appreciate that you're giving your efforts for free, you get loads of keyboard warriors in life. So I think you've got to be clear in the information you're giving, but my underlying message is going to be easy to work with, have a thick skin, and be down to earth, and try and laugh. And again, there's quite a few examples this evening where I'll just clarify, look, you are going to cock up and you are going to make mistakes. Everybody does in everyday conversation. And you have a trip of the tongue and you say, oh, of course, I mean such and such. The more naturally you respond to your own mistakes, the less other people will notice. In terms of the expectations, yeah, I can go through and give you my experience of what you're expected to know on those days. But I think it's just, a lot of this is sort of clarifying it isn't a glamorous role. It's fun, it's lots of fun, and that's what you'll need to remind yourself, but it's not going to be a glamorous role. It's hard and it's easy to make mistakes. You'll get lots of information changing at short notice, so I'm hopefully going to talk you through how you best respond to that, although each person will have their own idiosyncratic nuances of how they handle that ever-changing platform of the sport we all love so much. But that's the main thing. It's just a few tips on how to cope with that change. Preparation, I think, is quite important for me to remember. There's two levels of preparation. Of course, if, as is most often the case in my work, if I'm being paid to be somewhere, there is absolutely no excuse for being anything other than 100% best prepared. And I've got a few examples of my notes that I do for every World Championship and every Olympic Games. But at the same time, whilst there are some principles you can take from that, I think I'm trying to be quite mindful this evening that it's a different level of preparation if you're not being paid for that. And of course, you still want to get it right, and you'll still have some pride about that experience and wanting people to go away with a greater understanding of what they've just watched. But I think you'll find people are, if they're reasonable, they'll be very understanding about the fact that you also have full-time jobs or other busy elements of your life. So of course you want to be as well prepared as possible, but people will be respectful of the fact that you're giving your time and energy for free. So don't worry if you're not turning up as well prepared as if you were about to commentate with Steve Cram for 3 hours live on BBC One. Nobody would expect that level of prep. I'll talk you through the pitfalls if I can. I mean, it's mainly trying not to look too clever and trying not to bombard people with stats and information, because whilst athletics is a sport that necessitates the use of statistics, it's all about faster, higher, further. Don't feel as though you have to justify being there by bombarding people with statistics. There's a time and a place and ways of using that. And I do think that can be one of the little pitfalls. Nerves. I think you've always got to have an element of nerves. Of course, the more often you do something, the less nervous you are. But I think the day that you turn up with no nerves whatsoever is the day that an element of complacency leaks into your work and lowers the quality. I've done events for Alison, age group stuff, where I am purely and simply announcing, and I give as much energy to that and I set as much importance on that as I do when I go to a World Championship or an Olympic Games, because of course the stakes are higher at a global championship. I understand that. But if you understand athletes, which hopefully all of us do to varying degrees, whether it's an Olympic gold or whether it's making, an England age group team, that's a massive staging post for that athlete. So on behalf of the boys and girls, or men and women, however you want to describe the young athletes, on their behalf, you owe it to them to have a little bit of adrenaline flowing and to want to do a good job, because at the stage they're at of their careers, that is their short-term Olympic gold medal. So I don't have a problem with nerves, and I'll try and give you a few examples of how you sort of overcome that. And then as we get going, I'll also talk, and again, I'm more used to being a commentator than a stadium announcer. So the bits I've done for Alison, I've learned a lot from, because there are subtle but very distinct differences. So I'm hoping that by the time we get to the end of the spiel and you have some questions, you might be able to look at these and think, oh yeah, okay, I see what the tall, skinny git means now. Anyway, right, so that's hopefully the nuts and bolts. Here we go then. Right. All of you, as I've mentioned, you all have great athletics knowledge, but none of us know it all. Now, listen, there will be many of you, I don't know how many of you are out there, many of you will know more about athletics than I will. So I think the first thing is that you've got to be willing to carry on learning. I mean, just to give you a little example from my personal perspective. This isn't specifically to do with announcing, but it just shows you the ways in which your relationship with the sport grows. When I was competing, I was a county champion, but I never made it beyond that level, but I ran a lot of 1500s. Obviously, when you're down the track, there's always plenty of banter. You're doing a 10 by 400s off a minute jog recovery, and you're feeling like your lungs are going to fall out your bum at the end of every session. And then you glance over at these sprinters, with massive rest periods in between each rep. And there's always that little bit of banter that you think, well, there's all raw power and it's all in there anyway. And, a lot of it is natural ability and running on nerves and all that kind of chit chat. Since I started commentating on an elite basis, I've learned so much about how intense those short bursts are, because I've spent more time around those athletes. So, my understanding of how sprinters work, don't get me wrong, some of you will be sprint coaches and you'll still know far more than me. But whereas in the early days when I was commentating on hundreds, I would have respect for those athletes, of course. But in the back of my mind, I'd be thinking they're not having to work as hard as a 1500 meter runner or a 5000 meter runner or a 3 steeple. But of course, once you start learning the nuances, you realize that there's a real art form to that work, and you have an incredible admiration for how does somebody, and this is why Bolt was so amazing, I think, because you'd watch Bolt in a stadium and you'd think, right, well, in order to run as fast as you possibly can, you've got to be as relaxed as possible so it doesn't all go tense. But how on earth do you do that when no matter how you try and kid yourself, that there's, well, okay, if not a billion, hundreds of millions of people watching you around the world. So it's interesting, isn't it, how the first event that brought me into athletics was the 1500 meters. And I've had such an inbuilt respect for middle distance because I've done it, not at a very high level. Sorry, I just put my phone on silent. Not at a high level, but I have done the 15. So you think you understand the event. And again, when you get into the elite level of 1500, you start understanding that it's a lot more complex than the staging posts you use to set yourself to get through each lap and to try and make sure you push when you get round with 800. Don't sit back on that on that 300 that takes you to the bell. But it's watching these great guys that gives you that understanding. So I just think you've got to be open-minded. Some of you men and women will have been around athletics for 30, 40 years. But maybe when you sit there on the mic, there might be some technical elements of a triple jump or a high jump that's unfolding that the nuances of which you don't fully understand. Well, so just be prepared to have that conversation and don't try and be a smart. If you're not sure, keep it relatively simple until you've had a chat with someone, because the great thing about announcing is, you're not working to a strict set of television pictures that are going out live. So you can let it breathe a little bit and you can give yourself a little bit of room to maneuver. If you think, I just want to clarify what the rivalry is between those two, you can let it breathe a little bit and go, oh yeah, brilliant afternoon. By the way, coming next in 2 minutes' time is such and such. That's fine, have a pause. And then say, Andy, excuse me, can you just clarify blah, 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 blah. Always give yourself a little bit of thinking time. Willingness to make mistakes. Look, everyone, forgive me if this is grandmother and eggs. Most of you probably already know this. We're all going to make mistakes. If you're on a microphone, be it on television or at a stadium, you're going to make mistakes. Probably a dozen mistakes, because you're not going to get everything right every 5 minutes. Power of 10 might be incorrect on someone's. You might have quickly looked through Power of 10 and you might have been scan reading it and you might have misread a season's best for a PB. And then you see a throw that's in excess of what you think is a PB. And you go, oh, it's a brand new personal best for so-and-so. It's not, it's a season's best because they were 2 meters better last season. Don't worry about that. You've got to be prepared. You've got to accept, as much as you try and get it right, in something like athletics, where across one afternoon there are hundreds of athletes, male and female, drifting across your radar in various result sheets, you are going to make mistakes, especially because you've all got busy lives. And these events that you're working on, you're giving up your time voluntarily. So you may well not have had the luxury of sitting there for 10 hours poring over stats, which I'll show you a bit later, which is what you would do at a world championship or along those levels. The other element I've written down about making mistakes, again, look, let's say you're waxing lyrical about the athlete who's in lane 5, or someone you're going on about, you've got a lane 5 and a lane 7, and you're trying to call a 200. And of course, ordinarily you can read the stagger. And you're going on and on, athlete in lane 5, it's fantastic, he's on his way, this is great, it's what we expected, season's best last week, he's in cracking form. They come around the corner and you realise when the stagger unwinds in the home straight that you've been going on and on and on about the athlete in lane 5 when actually your eyes just slipped a little bit and it's the athlete in 6. So all I would say to you in that situation, that's got nothing to do with you having a lack of knowledge, it's just sometimes you look and your eye scans incorrectly and you make a mistake. So don't try and the rule I've always used is you try and give the correct information. But if you make a mistake, you don't try and pretend it hasn't happened. I would just say, probably as it was happening, if I was announcing it, I would say, so coming around, it's late, it's all about lane 5, lane 5, lane 5. You go, oh, wow. In fact, it's the athlete in lane 6. Beg your pardon. That's all you have to say. Then you carry on. So-and-so in 6 is having an unbelievable run. We thought it would all be about the athlete in lane 5 and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. What a great win. And then when they cross the line, you let it breathe a little bit and you wait for the official result and you'll say, well, all of us were thinking it was going to be 5. In fact, it was 6. It just shows you, doesn't it? Crazy things can happen. So that would be one of my biggest bits of advice of today, really. We're all human and we all make mistakes. And the less awkward you feel in the moment of having made that mistake, the less awkward you feel about it, the less awkwardness that you transmit to the person listening. So that's something I've picked up along the way. The voice, that sounds obvious, doesn't it? But what can sometimes happen when people are a bit nervous, and we'll come on to the nerves in more detail a bit later on, what I've found is when I've been trying to help out a little bit with new announcers, when you're a bit nervous, we all have a tendency, crazily, even though we're announcing, and I've seen this so many times, your voice goes a little bit quiet, as if you somehow think that if you're not feeling confident or you're making a mistake, you think that the quieter you speak, it must be a subconscious thing, that the quieter you speak, the less that mistake is coming across. But actually what happens is people are going, what? I can't, is he speaking loudly? Is there something wrong with that speaker? I can't hear him. So don't be afraid to project. But the counter argument to that is don't shout, because your voice won't last. It sounds crazy, even if you're only there for a day. But there's so many times where people are absolutely bloody bellowing, and they run out of gas because they're not drinking enough water, sipping water throughout the day, or they haven't had enough breaks and they're completely shattered. And they've burnt all their powerful voice in the first 2 hours. But you find your own rhythm with that. But I would definitely say don't be afraid to project, but don't feel the need to shout. But you have got to make sure that it is loud enough for people to hear you.